Every parent's worst nightmare is feeling helpless when their child needs them most. For Rachel, that nightmare became reality when the person she once trusted turned into her greatest threat. When the 911 call came through at 2:47 a.m., Rachel's shaking voice said, "Please help me. My ex locked me in the basement. I'm pregnant." Officer Daniel Martinez thought it was another domestic call. He was wrong. Rachel was carrying twins and had been hiding her pregnancy for months. When her ex discovered the truth, he locked her in the basement just as she went into labor. What happened next left every officer at the scene in tears. This pregnant mother showed incredible strength in the darkest moment of her life. The question is, would help arrive in time to save her and her babies? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rachel Thompson had always believed that love meant compromise. At 28, she'd learned too late that some compromises cost more than others. Standing in front of her third-grade classroom that crisp October morning, she adjusted her cardigan. To hide the bruises on her wrists, remnants of a relationship that had ended 3 months ago, but continued to haunt her daily dot, the worn leather journal tucked beneath her lesson plans contained secrets that could change everything. Page after page of careful handwriting documented doctor's appointments, prenatal vitamins hidden in vitamin bottles, and the growing fear that Marcus would discover what she'd been hiding from him. Inside that journal lay the truth. She was 6 months pregnant with twins. Rachel's story began 2 years earlier when Marcus Holbrook walked into the coffee shop where she spent her Sunday mornings grading papers. Tall, confident, with the kind of smile that made her forget about the stack of essays waiting for her attention, he'd approached her table with practiced charm. "You look like someone who takes her coffee as seriously as her work," he'd said, nodding toward her red pen and the papers spread across the small table. Those early months had felt like a fairy tale. Marcus brought her flowers, remembered her favorite books, and listened with apparent fascination as she talked about her students. He had a way of making her feel like the most important person in the room, his attention so focused and intense that she'd never noticed how quickly he began making decisions for both of them. The first red flag should have been his reaction when she mentioned visiting her sister Emma in Portland for Thanksgiving. "Why would you want to spend time with people who don't really know you like I do?" he'd asked, his voice carrying just enough hurt to make her reconsider. By Christmas, she'd stopped mentioning Emma altogether. Rachel's best friend Sarah had tried to warn her. During one of their weekly coffee meetings that became increasingly infrequent as Marcus found reasons why Rachel couldn't make them, Sarah had leaned across the table with concern etched in her features. "Rach, I haven't seen you. Smile like yourself in months," Sarah had said gently. "When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" The love, Rachel had believed then, meant putting the relationship first. Marcus had convinced her that Sarah was jealous of their connection, that her friend couldn't understand the depth of their bond. Looking back now, Rachel realized how systematically he'd isolated her from everyone who might have helped her see the truth. The controlling behavior had escalated gradually. First, he'd wanted to know where she was at all times. Then came the criticism disguised as concern. Her clothes were too revealing, her laugh too loud, her independence too threatening to their future together. By the time he'd moved into her apartment without really asking, Rachel had forgotten what her own voice sounded like when she wasn't constantly measuring her words against his potential reactions. The breaking point had come on a rainy evening. In July, Rachel had been late coming home from a mandatory faculty meeting, and Marcus had been waiting in her living room, pacing like a caged animal. The argument that followed had been their worst yet, his anger erupting into something that crossed lines she'd never imagined he would cross. "You think you can just do whatever you want," he'd shouted, his hand connecting with her cheek in a sharp slap that left her ears ringing. You forget that we're building something together. That means sacrifices. Standing there with her face stinging and her heart breaking, Rachel had finally seen clearly. This wasn't love. This wasn't even close to love. The man she believed she knew had been replaced by someone whose need to control her had become more important than her well-being. The next morning, while Marcus was at work, Rachel had packed his belongings and changed her locks. When he'd returned that evening to find his things on the doorstep and his key no longer working, his rage had been terrifying. He'd pounded on her door for an hour, alternating between apologies and threats, promises to change and warnings about what would happen if she tried to move on without him. That had been 3 months ago. 3 months of hang-up calls, of finding him waiting by her car after school, of messages left on her doorstep that ranged from pleading to menacing. 3 months of living in fear while simultaneously discovering the most unexpected joy of her life. The pregnancy had been a shock. Rachel had attributed her missed periods to stress, her nausea to anxiety. When she'd finally worked up the courage to take a home test, seeing those 2 pink lines had sent her world spinning in an entirely new direction. The ultrasound 2 weeks later had delivered an even bigger surprise: twins. Dr. Patricia Williams, her obstetrician, was a kind woman in her 50s who'd immediately understood Rachel's situation without requiring detailed explanations. When Rachel had explained that she needed to keep the pregnancy confidential, Dr. Williams had nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd seen too many women in similar circumstances. "We'll take extra care with your privacy," she'd assured Rachel during that first appointment, "and we'll make sure you have all the support you need." The journal had become Rachel's lifeline during these hidden months. In its pages, she documented every doctor's visit, every milestone, every flutter of movement that reminded her she was growing 2 little lives inside her. She wrote letters to her unborn children, promises about the life she would give them, a life free from the fear and control she'd known with their biological father. 20 miles away, Officer Daniel Martinez was finishing his second cup of coffee in the break room of the Central District Police Station. At 45, Daniel had seen enough domestic violence cases to recognize the patterns, the escalations, the moments when a situation could turn deadly. His 20-year career had taught him that behind every 911 call was a human story, often one involving people at the most vulnerable moments of their lives. Daniel's own connection to domestic violence ran deeper than professional experience. His mother had endured years of abuse from his stepfather before finally finding the strength to leave when Daniel was 15. He'd never forgotten the night she'd woken him and his younger sister, whispering urgently as she packed their belongings into grocery bags. "We're going to be okay," she'd promised, though her hands had been shaking as she'd helped them climb out their bedroom window. "We're going to somewhere safe." That experience had shaped Daniel's approach to his job. Every victim he encountered reminded him of his mother's courage, every perpetrator of his stepfather's rage. He'd built a reputation in the department for his patience with victims, his ability to create the kind of trust that made people willing to tell their stories. His partner, Lisa Chun, often teased him about his therapy sessions with victims, but she'd learned to respect his methods. Daniel's approach got results: confessions, testimonies, and most importantly, convictions that kept dangerous people away from their victims. Tonight felt different, though Daniel couldn't explain why. He'd been restless all evening, checking and rechecking equipment, reviewing case files that didn't require his attention. His wife, Maria, had noticed his distraction over dinner. "You're somewhere else tonight," she'd observed, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Everything okay?" Daniel had 3 children of his own, 2 daughters in college and a son finishing high school. Fatherhood had intensified his protective instincts, made every case involving families feel personal. He understood the fierce love that drove people to desperate measures, the lengths parents would go to protect their children. As his shift approached its final hours, Daniel had no idea that across town, a young woman was making the hardest decision of her life, or that her courage would soon test every skill he developed in 2 decades of police work. Rachel closed her journal and placed her hand on her rounded belly, feeling the familiar flutter of movement that had become her comfort during these frightening months. Tomorrow was her next doctor's appointment, and Dr. Williams had mentioned that they'd need to start making decisions about the delivery soon. The twins were healthy, but carrying multiples always carried risks. She'd been hoping she could make it through the pregnancy without Marcus discovering her secret. Her plan had been simple: disappear during winter break, have the babies somewhere safe, and start over in a new town where he couldn't find them. She'd already applied for teaching positions in 3 different states, each far enough away to offer the fresh start she craved. The plans, Rachel was about to learn, had a way of changing when you least expected it. And some secrets were too big to keep hidden forever. The ultrasound photo had been her mistake, a moment of maternal pride that would cost her everything she'd worked to protect. Rachel had been carrying it in her purse for 3 days, unable to resist pulling it out during quiet moments to study the grainy black and white images of her babies. 2 perfect silhouettes, heads touching as if they were already comforting each other. She should have left it at home. Should have locked it away with her journal and all the other evidence of the life growing inside her. Instead, she tucked it into the side pocket of her leather purse, the same purse Marcus had grabbed during their confrontation in the hallway of her apartment building. It was a Thursday evening in late October when her carefully constructed world began to crumble. Rachel had been returning from her prenatal appointment, Dr. Williams' words still echoing in her mind. "We need to start thinking about delivery plans. Twins often come early, and you're already at 32 weeks. Marcus had been waiting in the lobby of her building, something he'd done sporadically over the past 3 months, despite the restraining order she'd filed. He'd learned to time his appearances just right, showing up when she was most tired, most vulnerable, catching her off guard before she could retreat to the safety of her apartment. "Rachel, we need to talk," he'd said, stepping into her path as she headed toward the elevator. His appearance shocked her. He'd lost weight, his usually immaculate clothing wrinkled and unkempt. His eyes held a desperate intensity that made her take an instinctive step backward. "I have a restraining order against you, Marcus," she'd replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear racing through her chest. "You need to leave. That piece of paper doesn't change what we had together," he'd said, moving closer. 3 months apart has made me realize what I lost. I've been going to therapy, Rachel. I'm getting better." The conversation had escalated quickly, his pleading tone shifting to frustration when she'd refused to listen. When she'd tried to step around him, he grabbed her purse, ostensibly to get her attention. The contents had scattered across the lobby floor: keys, wallet, tissues, and the ultrasound photo that fluttered to his feet like a confession. Marcus had stared at the image for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and finally rage. "What is this?" he'd asked, though they both knew the answer. Rachel's mouth had gone dry. "It's not what you think. You're pregnant." The words had come out as an accusation. "How far along? When were you going to tell me?" She'd tried to run then, tried to make it to the elevator before he could process what he'd discovered. But Marcus had been faster, his hand clamping around her wrist with a grip that would leave bruises. "Those are my children," he'd said, his voice carrying the possessiveness that had characterized their entire relationship. "Did you really think you could keep this from me?" The elevator had been too slow. Marcus had dragged her toward the basement entrance, a service area she'd barely noticed during the 2 years she'd lived in the building. Her protests had echoed off the concrete walls as he'd forced her down the narrow stairs. "You're going to hurt the babies," she'd pleaded, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Marcus, please, I'm having contractions." It wasn't entirely true. The cramping she'd been experiencing could have been normal pregnancy discomfort, but the stress of the confrontation was making everything worse. Her heart was racing, her breathing shallow, and she could feel the tight band of tension across her belly that Dr. Williams had warned her to watch for. The basement was everything she'd feared: cold, damp, and isolated. Marcus had pushed her toward a storage room in the back corner, a space barely larger than a closet with concrete walls and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. "You tried to steal my children from me," he'd said, pacing in front of the door like a guard. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you could just disappear with them?" Rachel had sunk onto a dusty cardboard box, wrapping her arms around her belly as the cramping intensified. "They're better off without you," she'd whispered, immediately regretting the words when she saw his face darken. "You don't get to make that decision," Marcus had replied. "I have rights. Those babies are half mine." The next 2 hours had been the longest of Rachel's life. Marcus had alternated between raging about her betrayal and making plans for their future, a future where he controlled every aspect of her life and their children's lives. He talked about moving to another state, about homeschooling the twins so they wouldn't be influenced by outside forces, about the family they would build together whether she wanted it or not. Rachel had tried to reason with him, tried to appeal to whatever love he'd once claimed to feel for her. But the man pacing in front of her was someone she'd never seen before: desperate, unhinged, and completely convinced that he was the victim in their story. The contractions had become more regular, more intense. Rachel had delivered enough babies in her classroom role plays to recognize the signs of early labor, and fear had settled into her chest like a cold stone. 32 weeks was too early. The babies would need medical intervention, specialized care that they couldn't get in a basement storage room. "Marcus, something's wrong," she'd said during one of his calmer moments. "I need to go to the hospital. The babies are coming too early." He'd looked at her with suspicion, as if her labor might be another deception. "You're lying. You're trying to trick me into letting you go." "I'm not lying," she'd gasped as another contraction gripped her. "Please, if you care about them at all, help me get to a doctor." But Marcus had been too far gone to hear reason. He'd left her there, promising to return with supplies, warning her not to try anything foolish. The sound of the door locking had been the most terrifying sound Rachel had ever heard. Alone in the basement, with her contractions growing stronger, and her phone battery at 15%, Rachel had made the hardest decision of her life. She dialed 911 with shaking fingers, knowing that this call would change everything for her babies, and for the man whose obsession had brought them to this moment. 911, what's your emergency? Please help me, Rachel had whispered into the phone, her voice breaking with fear and hope. My ex locked me in the basement. I'm pregnant, and something's wrong. Daniel Martinez had been reviewing his case files when the dispatch call crackled through the radio at 2:47 a.m. The night had been unusually quiet, the kind of shift that made experienced officers wary of what might be coming. His partner, Lisa Chen, looked up from her own paperwork as the dispatcher's voice filled their patrol car. Unit 23, we have a domestic disturbance with possible medical emergency. Female caller reports being locked in a basement by her ex-boyfriend. Caller is pregnant and experiencing complications. Daniel reached for the radio immediately. Unit 23 responding. Do we have an address? Caller provided address as 1247 Maple Street, apartment building, basement level. Caller's phone battery is low, connection intermittent. Lisa was already starting the engine as Daniel grabbed his emergency response guide from the glove compartment. The well-worn manual contained protocols for domestic violence situations, pages annotated with his personal notes from 20 years of experience. Every domestic call was potentially life-threatening, but pregnant victims added layers of complexity that required careful navigation. What's our ETA? Daniel asked, buckling his seatbelt as Lisa pulled away from their patrol area. 8 minutes if traffic stays clear, she replied, flipping on the sirens. You thinking what I'm thinking? Daniel nodded grimly. Domestic situations involving pregnant women have the highest escalation potential. If he's already locked her in a basement, he's crossed into territory where anything can happen. As they raced through the empty streets, Daniel's mind drifted to his own family's history. His mother's face flashed in his memory. The way she'd looked that night they'd escaped, fear and determination warring in her eyes. She'd been pregnant with his younger sister when his stepfather's violence had reached its peak. The parallel wasn't lost on him. I need you to understand something, his mother had told him years later when he'd first started police training. The most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship is when she tries to leave. That's when they lose control completely. This woman, Rachel, according to the dispatch, had already left her abuser 3 months ago. The fact that he'd resurfaced now, with such desperation, suggested something had changed. Something had triggered an escalation that had driven him to kidnapping and false imprisonment. Backup units? Lisa asked, weaving through an intersection. Request 2. Additional units and a paramedic team, Daniel replied, his training taking over. If she's in labor, we'll need medical support immediately. And if the perpetrator is still on scene, we might need additional officers for containment. The apartment building at 1247 Maple Street was a modest 3-story structure built in the 1960s, the kind of place where young professionals lived while saving for their first house. Daniel had been to similar buildings countless times. Thin walls that couldn't contain domestic disputes. Narrow hallways that made suspect apprehension challenging. Building layout suggests multiple entry points, Daniel observed as they parked. Front entrance, rear fire exit, and likely basement access from the side alley. Lisa was already coordinating with the backup units arriving behind them. Units 15 and 22 on scene. Paramedics 2 minutes out. Daniel approached the building with the methodical care his experience had taught him. Every domestic situation was unpredictable, but when children's lives were involved, born or unborn, the stakes climbed exponentially. His emergency guide contained specific protocols for pregnant victims, including the critical importance of medical evaluation, even if the immediate threat was contained. The front entrance was secured with a standard key lock, but Daniel could see through the glass. Doors to a small lobby area. No sign of the perpetrator, no obvious signs of struggle. The real challenge would be locating the basement entrance and accessing it without alerting a potentially violent suspect to their arrival. Side alley, Lisa whispered, pointing toward a narrow passage between buildings. Most older buildings have external basement access. They moved quietly around the building's perimeter, flashlights sweeping the ground for any indication of recent disturbance. Daniel's radio crackled softly as the dispatcher updated them on the victim's status. Caller still connected but responding slowly. Reports contractions approximately 5 minutes apart. Caller states perpetrator left scene but may return. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. 5-minute intervals meant active labor, and for a woman at what the dispatcher had reported as 32 weeks gestation, early labor could be life-threatening for both mother and babies. The medical window was closing rapidly. The basement door was exactly where Lisa had predicted. A heavy metal door set into the building's foundation, secured with a padlock that showed signs of recent tampering. Daniel examined the lock with his flashlight while Lisa positioned herself to watch for the perpetrator's return. Lock's been forced, Daniel reported quietly. Recent damage to the hasp. Someone wanted in here badly enough to break the building's security. Inside the basement, they could hear a faint voice, weak but persistent. Daniel recognized the cadence of someone talking themselves through a crisis, the way victims sometimes maintained consciousness by focusing on external communication. Rachel? Daniel called through the door. "This is Officer Martinez with the police. Can you hear me?" The response was immediate, though strained. "Yes, please. I'm having contractions. The babies are coming too early." Lisa was already working on the padlock with bolt cutters from their emergency kit. "Almost through," she reported. Daniel kept his voice calm and reassuring as he spoke through the door. "Rachel, we're getting you out right now. The paramedics are here, and we're going to take good care of you and your babies." "Is the person who locked you in here still in the building?" "I don't know," Rachel replied, her voice tight with pain. "He left but said he was coming back." "I can't." Her words cut off in what Daniel recognized as a contraction. The lock gave way, and Lisa pulled the door open to reveal a narrow staircase leading into darkness. Daniel descended first, his flashlight illuminating concrete walls and a musty storage area. In the back corner, he could see a small figure hunched over what appeared to be a cardboard box. Rachel Thompson looked smaller than her 28 years, her dark hair matted with sweat and her face pale with exhaustion. But her eyes held a determination that Daniel immediately recognized, the fierce protectiveness of a mother defending her children. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Martinez," he said gently, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "You're safe now. We're going to get you to the hospital." The paramedics were already descending the stairs behind him, their equipment clattering in the confined space. Daniel stepped aside to let them work, but he kept his eyes on Rachel's face, watching for signs of the trauma that extended far beyond physical injury. 20 years of experience had taught him that the rescue was often just the beginning. The basement's concrete walls seemed to close in as paramedic Maria Santos knelt beside Rachel, her experienced hands already assessing the situation with practiced efficiency. Daniel watched from a respectful distance as Maria's team transformed the cramped storage room into an impromptu medical station, their movements coordinated by years of emergency response training. "Ma'am, I'm Maria," the paramedic said, her voice carrying the same calm authority Daniel used in crisis situations. "Can you tell me how far along you are in your pregnancy?" 32 weeks, Rachel gasped between contractions. "Twins. I wasn't supposed to go into labor yet. This is too early." Maria's expression remained professionally neutral, but Daniel caught the slight tension in her shoulders. 32-week twins meant high-risk delivery, potentially requiring immediate surgical intervention and specialized neonatal care. Every minute they spent in this basement was time stolen from critical medical preparation. "We're going to get you to the hospital right away," Maria assured Rachel while checking her vital signs. "Your blood pressure is elevated, which is understandable, given the stress you've been under." "When did the contractions start?" "About 3 hours ago," Rachel replied, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. "They weren't this strong at first. I thought it was just stress, but then another contraction cut off her words. This one lasting nearly a minute." Daniel stepped forward, his emergency response guide tucked under his arm. The document contained specific protocols for situations involving pregnant victims, including the critical importance of maintaining scene security while medical personnel worked. Marcus Holbrook was still unaccounted for, and his pattern of behavior suggested he would return. "Rachel, I need to ask you some questions while the paramedics prepare for transport," Daniel said gently. "The person who locked you down here, what's his name?" "Marcus Holbrook," she replied, spelling the last name between shallow breaths. "He's my ex-boyfriend. We broke up 3 months ago, but he's been following me, calling me, showing up at my work." Elisa appeared at the top of the stairs, holding a stack of official-looking papers. "Martinez, you need to see this," she called down. Building manager provided apartment records. Marcus Holbrook was living here until July. Current address unknown, but there's a history. Daniel climbed the stairs to examine the documents Lisa had found. The paperwork painted a troubling picture: noise complaints from multiple neighbors, reports of shouting matches and property damage. And finally, an incident report from July that resulted in Marcus's eviction from the building. Look at this. Lisa pointed to a highlighted section of the eviction notice. Property manager notes that Mr. Holbrook became increasingly erratic after his girlfriend ended their relationship. Quote, subject repeatedly violated terms of lease by harassing other tenants and attempting to gain access to ex-girlfriend's apartment. Daniel studied the timeline, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Marcus had been escalating for months, his behavior becoming more desperate as Rachel maintained her distance. The discovery of her pregnancy had been the final catalyst, pushing him into the kind of dangerous territory that often ended in tragedy. Any current address? Daniel asked. Nothing official, but the manager thinks he's been staying with a friend across town. I've got units checking known associates. Back in the basement, Maria and her team had successfully prepared Rachel for transport. The gurney barely fit through the narrow doorway, requiring careful maneuvering to navigate the concrete stairs without jostling their patient. Blood pressure is stabilizing, Maria reported to Daniel as they loaded Rachel into the ambulance. Contractions are still strong and regular, but she's handling the stress better than expected. This young woman has remarkable resilience. Daniel had seen that resilience before in his mother's eyes when she packed their belongings in grocery bags and countless victims who'd found strength they didn't know they possessed. Rachel's situation was unique in its complexity, but her courage was familiar territory for him. Officer Martinez, Rachel called out as the paramedics secured her gurney. Will you come with me? I don't have anyone else, and I'm scared. He'll find me at the hospital. The request stirred something in Daniel's chest. Protocol suggested he should remain at the scene to coordinate the search for Marcus, but Rachel's vulnerability reminded him why he'd chosen this profession. Sometimes, protecting and serving meant making decisions based on human need rather than bureaucratic procedures. Lisa, can you coordinate the manhunt from here? He asked his partner. I want to stay with the victim until we have family support in place. Lisa nodded immediately. Go. I'll handle the scene and keep you updated on our search for Holbrook. The ambulance ride to St. Mary's Hospital took 12 minutes, during which Rachel's condition remained stable but concerning. Daniel sat beside the gurney, watching Maria monitor both maternal and fetal vital signs with equipment that seemed impossibly sophisticated for the back of a moving vehicle. Officer, Rachel said quietly, reaching for his hand during a brief respite between contractions. There's something else you need to know. I've been hiding this pregnancy for months. Marcus didn't know until tonight when he found an ultrasound photo in my purse. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. That explains the escalation. In my experience, these situations often reach a crisis point when new information comes to light. You did the right thing by calling for help. I was trying to protect them, Rachel continued, tears mixing with the sweat on her face. I thought, if I could just make it through the pregnancy without him knowing, I could disappear, start over somewhere safe. I never wanted them to know their father was capable of something like this. Children are incredibly resilient, Daniel replied, drawing on his own experience as both an officer and a father. What matters most is that they have a mother who's willing to fight for their safety. That kind of love creates a foundation that can withstand almost anything. The hospital's emergency entrance appeared ahead, bright lights illuminating a team of medical personnel waiting for their arrival. Daniel had called ahead during the transport, ensuring that Dr. Patricia Williams, Rachel's obstetrician, would be present to coordinate care. As they wheeled Rachel through the automatic doors, Daniel felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The rescue phase was complete, but the protection phase was just beginning. Marcus Holbrook was still free, still dangerous, and still convinced that he had rights that superseded Rachel's safety and autonomy. The next few hours would determine whether this story ended in triumph or tragedy. Daniel had seen both outcomes too many times to be optimistic, but Rachel's strength gave him hope that this time might be different. The hospital bracelet felt foreign around Rachel's wrist as she lay in the labor and delivery room, its plastic surface a tangible reminder that she was no longer hiding. The simple identification band contained her name, date of birth, and the words that would have terrified her just hours earlier. Patient, high-risk pregnancy, twins. Dr. Patricia Williams moved around the room with the quiet efficiency Rachel had come to trust over the past months of secret appointments. The obstetrician's presence provided an anchor of familiarity in the chaos of emergency medical care, her calm demeanor helping to steady Rachel's racing heart. The good news is that both babies are showing strong heart rates, Dr. Williams said, adjusting the fetal monitors that tracked each twin's vital signs. Your contractions have stabilized since we got you here, which gives us more time to make decisions about delivery. Rachel nodded, though the relief was tempered by the knowledge that Marcus was still out there somewhere, probably searching for her. Daniel Martinez sat in the chair beside her bed, his police radio turned low, but still crackling with updates from the search teams combing the city for her ex-boyfriend. "Any word from your sister?" Daniel asked, checking his watch. It was nearly 5 a.m., and the October darkness outside the hospital windows was just beginning to soften toward dawn. "She's driving down from Portland," Rachel replied. "Emma should be here in about 3 hours. I haven't told her everything about Marcus. She knew we broke up, but not about the stalking or the restraining order." The admission carried shame that Daniel immediately recognized. Domestic violence victims often isolated themselves from family and friends, either at their abuser's insistence or from their own embarrassment at finding themselves in such situations. Rachel's secrecy about both the abuse and the pregnancy had compounded her isolation, leaving her to face months of fear alone. "Family dynamics can be complicated in these situations," Daniel said carefully. "Sometimes the people who love us most have the strongest reactions to learning we've been in danger." Before Rachel could respond, a soft knock interrupted their conversation. A woman in scrubs entered, introducing herself as Jennifer Walsh, the hospital's victim advocate specialist. Daniel had worked with Jennifer on previous cases and respected her ability to navigate the complex intersection of medical care and legal protection. "Rachel, I want to explain some of the resources available to you," Jennifer said, settling into a chair on the opposite side of the bed. "First and most importantly, you're safe here. Hospital security has been notified about the situation, and no one can access this floor without proper authorization." The concept of safety felt abstract to Rachel after months of looking over her shoulder. She'd grown accustomed to hypervigilance, to measuring every decision against the possibility that Marcus might be watching. Learning to trust that protection was possible would take time. "We've also contacted the district attorney's office," Jennifer continued. "Based on Officer Martinez's report, Mr. Holbrook will be facing multiple felony charges when he's apprehended: kidnapping, false imprisonment, and violation of a protective order. These are serious crimes that carry significant prison sentences." Rachel's hand moved instinctively to her belly as another mild contraction rippled through her abdomen. The babies seemed more active now that she was lying still, their movements reassuring evidence that they were surviving this ordeal along with her. "I need to ask you some difficult questions," Daniel said gently, pulling out a small notebook. "For the investigation, we need a complete timeline of Marcus's behavior since your breakup. I know this is exhausting, but the more detail you can provide, the stronger case we can build." The next hour was painful in ways that had nothing to do with labor contractions. Rachel recounted 3 months of increasingly erratic behavior, the hang-up calls that came at all hours, the gifts left on her doorstep that ranged from flowers to disturbing letters, the way Marcus had learned her schedule so precisely that, He could accidentally encounter her at the grocery store or coffee shop. He always had an explanation, Rachel said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. He wasn't following me. He just happened to need gas at the same station. He wasn't watching my apartment. He was visiting a friend in the neighborhood. For a while, I almost believed him. Stalking behaviors often escalate gradually, Daniel noted, writing in his notebook. Perpetrators test boundaries, see how much they can get away with before their victims push back or involve law enforcement. Dr. Williams returned with test results and a consultation from the neonatal intensive care unit. Your blood work looks good, and both babies are handling the stress well, she reported. We're going to continue monitoring, but if labor progresses normally, we should be able to deliver healthy babies despite the early timing. The phrase healthy babies hit Rachel with unexpected force, bringing tears she'd been holding back for hours. Throughout the months of hiding her pregnancy, she'd focused so intently on keeping the secret that she'd sometimes forgotten to hope for the future these children represented. I haven't even thought of names yet, she admitted, surprising herself. With the confession, I was so focused on keeping them safe from Marcus that I didn't let myself imagine actually being their mother. Daniel's radio crackled with an update from Lisa. Martinez, we've got a lead on Holbrook's location. Friend's apartment on the south side. Units are moving into position. The news sent a jolt of anxiety through Rachel's chest, followed immediately by contractions that were noticeably stronger than before. Dr. Williams frowned at the fetal monitor readings, noting the correlation between Rachel's stress levels and the baby's responses. I need everyone to help keep Rachel as calm as possible, the doctor said firmly. These babies are sensitive to their mother's emotional state, and we want to avoid any additional complications. Jennifer, the victim advocate, leaned forward with concern. Rachel, it's completely normal to feel anxious when you know law enforcement is closing in on your abuser. Many survivors experience a mix of relief and fear at this stage. What if they don't find him? Rachel asked, voicing the worry that had been growing in her mind. What if he disappears, and I spend the rest of my life wondering when he'll show up again? Daniel had heard this fear from countless victims over the years. The promise of justice often felt abstract when weighed against the immediate terror of an uncontrolled threat. His mother had expressed similar concerns during the months after they'd escaped his stepfather's violence. In my experience, people like Marcus don't disappear easily, Daniel said carefully. They're too invested in maintaining control to simply walk away. That persistence is part of what makes them dangerous, but it's also what usually leads to their arrest. The automatic doors to the labor and delivery unit whispered open, admitting a woman who looked like an older version of Rachel, same dark hair, same determined expression, but with an additional layer of worry etched around her eyes. Emma Thompson Walsh had clearly driven through the night, her clothes wrinkled and her face pale with exhaustion. Rachel! Emma rushed to the bedside, her hands hovering uncertainly as she took in the medical equipment and the visible evidence of her sister's ordeal. I came as fast as I could. Are you okay? Are the babies okay? The reunion was everything Rachel had needed, arms that held her without judgment, tears that matched her own, and the familiar comfort of someone who'd known her before Marcus had entered her life. Emma's presence made the hospital room feel less like a medical facility and more like a sanctuary. I should have told you, Rachel whispered against her sister's shoulder. About Marcus, about the pregnancy, about all of it. I was so scared and ashamed. You're telling me now, Emma replied firmly, and we're going to handle this together. You're not alone anymore. Daniel stepped back to give the sisters privacy, but his radio crackled again with urgent communication. All units, suspect vehicle spotted 2 blocks from hospital. Black sedan, license plate matching registered vehicle for Marcus Holbrook. The update sent a chill through the room. Marcus wasn't fleeing. He was coming to the hospital, drawn by the same obsessive need to control Rachel that had driven him to lock her in the basement. Daniel immediately contacted hospital security while Dr. Williams called for additional medical personnel. "Nobody comes on this floor without going through security," Daniel announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. "Emma, I need you to stay with Rachel. If anyone tries to enter this room who isn't medical staff or law enforcement, you hit the call button immediately." Rachel felt the familiar panic rising in her chest, the same suffocating fear that had characterized the past 3 months of her life. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't alone. She had Daniel's protection, Emma's support, Dr. Williams' medical expertise, and most importantly, she had something worth fighting for. The contractions were getting stronger, more regular, as if her body understood that safety was finally within reach and was ready to bring her children into a world where they could be protected. Emma pulled a worn photograph from her wallet with trembling hands, a family picture taken 3 summers ago at their cousin's wedding. In it, Rachel looked radiant and carefree, her arm linked with Emma's while their nieces posed in matching flower girl dresses. The image seemed to belong to a different lifetime, before Marcus had systematically dismantled Rachel's confidence and isolated her from everyone who loved her. "Do you remember this day?" Emma asked softly, holding the photo where Rachel could see it. "You were so excited about starting your teaching job, talking about how you wanted to make a difference in kids' lives." Rachel studied the photograph through tears, seeing herself as she used to be, open, optimistic, unafraid. "I feel like that person disappeared somewhere along the way," she admitted. "Marcus convinced me that everything I valued about myself was wrong." "That person didn't disappear," Emma said firmly. "She's been protecting these babies for months, making impossible decisions, surviving things that would break most people. The woman in this picture couldn't have done what you've done." Dr. Williams returned with results from the latest fetal monitoring, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Both babies are showing excellent stress tolerance," she reported. "Your daughter, baby A, is in the optimal position for delivery. Your son is breech, which we expected with twins, but he's stable and healthy." The casual mention of genders hit Rachel with unexpected force. Throughout the months of secret appointments, she'd avoided learning whether she was carrying boys or girls, afraid that knowing would make them feel too real, too precious to risk losing. Now, facing the possibility of imminent delivery, the knowledge felt like a gift. "A daughter and a son," she whispered, her hand moving to her belly with new awareness. "I have a daughter and a son." Daniel's radio interrupted the moment with an urgent update from the tactical team positioned around the hospital. "Suspect apprehended in parking garage level B, Marcus Holbrook, is in custody." Repeat, suspect is in custody. The relief that flooded through Rachel was so intense it triggered another contraction, this one strong enough to make her grip the bed rails. Dr. Williams immediately checked the monitors, noting the correlation between emotional release and physical response. "Your body has been holding tremendous stress," the doctor explained. "Now that the immediate threat is resolved, your system may naturally progress toward delivery. This is actually a positive development." Emma squeezed Rachel's hand as the contraction subsided. "Tell me about them," she said, nodding toward Rachel's belly. "What have the past months been like for you?" Rachel found herself talking about experiences she'd never shared with anyone. The first flutter of movement at 18 weeks. The way she'd started sleeping on her side to make room for 2 growing babies. The secret conversations she'd whispered to them during her loneliest moments. "I used to read to them," she admitted. "Children's books I'd borrowed from my classroom. I wanted them to know my voice, to feel loved even before they were born." "They know," Emma assured her. "Look how hard they fought to stay safe during everything that happened tonight." They know their mother would do anything to protect them. Daniel returned from coordinating with the arrest team, his expression showing the satisfaction of a case reaching successful resolution. Marcus is being processed downtown, he reported. Initial charges include kidnapping, false imprisonment, stalking, and violation of a protective order. The district attorney's office is confident these charges will result in significant prison time. What happens now? Rachel asked, though part of her was afraid to hope for a normal future. Now you focus on becoming a mother, Daniel replied. The legal system will handle Marcus. Your job is to take care of yourself and those babies. Dr. Williams consulted with the neonatal team before returning with a delivery plan. We're going to continue monitoring for now, but if labor progresses, naturally, we're prepared for a twin delivery at 32 weeks. The NICU team is standing by, and both babies should do very well with minimal intervention. The next few hours passed in a strange combination of intensity and calm. Rachel's contractions became more regular and productive, while Emma helped. Her practiced breathing techniques they'd learned together as children during their mother's yoga classes. Daniel remained nearby, his presence providing a sense of security Rachel hadn't felt in months. I need to tell you something, Rachel said to Emma during a quiet moment between contractions. I applied for teaching jobs in 3 different states. I was planning to disappear after the babies were born. Start over somewhere Marcus could never find us. Emma nodded thoughtfully. That took incredible courage. But now you have choices you didn't have before. Marcus won't be a threat for a very long time, and you have family who wants to help. I don't know how to trust that safety is real, Rachel admitted. For months, every decision has been about hiding, about staying one step ahead of his obsession. I don't remember how to live without fear. It takes time, Daniel interjected gently. In my experience, survivors often struggle with the transition from crisis mode to recovery mode. Your hypervigilance kept you alive. It's going to take practice to turn it off. Dr. Williams returned with an update that changed everything. Rachel, your cervix has progressed significantly in the past hour. We're approaching active labor, which means we need to make some decisions about delivery timing and method. The medical team mobilized with practiced efficiency, transforming the labor room into a delivery suite equipped for high-risk twin birth. Rachel watched the preparations with a mixture of excitement and terror, realizing that her months of hiding were truly ending. Are you ready to meet your children? Dr. Williams asked, her hands already moving to examine Rachel's progress. Rachel looked at Emma, then at Daniel, then at the medical team assembled to help her safely bring 2 lives into the world. For the first time in months, she felt surrounded by people who wanted nothing more than her well-being and that of her babies. I'm ready, she said, meaning it completely. Rachel's handwritten testimony notes covered 3 pages of hospital stationery, her careful script documenting every detail. She could remember despite the intensifying contractions that gripped her body every 3 minutes. Her determination to ensure justice amazed everyone in the delivery room. Between breathing exercises and medical assessments, she insisted on completing a comprehensive account of Marcus's behavior. You don't have to do this now, Emma said gently, watching her sister push through another wave of pain to finish writing. The case can wait until after the babies are born. No, it can't, Rachel replied with surprising firmness. Daniel told me there might be other victims. If my testimony can help protect other women, other babies, then I need to do this while everything is fresh in my memory. Dr. Williams monitored the testimony session with professional concern, noting how Rachel's stress levels affected both maternal and fetal heart rates. I need you to focus on your breathing between writing sessions, she instructed. These babies are responding to your emotional state, and we want to keep them as calm as possible. The delivery room had been transformed into a high-tech medical facility equipped for premature twin birth. Two warming beds stood ready for the babies, each surrounded by specialized equipment that could provide immediate respiratory and cardiac support if needed. The neonatal intensive care team waited quietly in the adjoining room, their presence both reassuring and sobering. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, and Emma reached for it automatically. Her face paled as she read the screen, and she quickly showed the message to the security officer stationed outside the room. "It's from Marcus," Emma whispered, her voice tight with renewed fear. Somehow he's still trying to contact her. The message was brief but chilling. "This isn't over. Those are my children, too." Dr. Williams immediately called for additional security, while Emma deleted the message before Rachel could see it. The medical team had worked too hard to create a safe, calm environment for delivery. They weren't about to let Marcus's continued manipulation threaten the progress they'd made. "How is he sending messages from jail?" Emma asked the security officer. "Contraband phone, probably," the officer replied grimly. "Or he's had someone else send it for him. Either way, we're tracing the number and adding it to the evidence file." Daniel burst through the delivery room doors just as Rachel was documenting the final details of her basement imprisonment. His return brought immediate relief to everyone present, his authoritative presence restoring the sense of protection that had been shaken by Marcus's message. "How are we doing?" he asked, dividing his attention between Rachel's medical condition and the security concerns that had developed in his absence. "Contractions are 3 minutes apart and getting stronger," Dr. Williams reported. "Both babies are tolerating labor well, but we're approaching the point where delivery will become inevitable within the next hour or two." Daniel examined Rachel's testimony notes with professional admiration. Despite being in active labor, she'd created a chronological account of Marcus's stalking behavior that would be invaluable to prosecutors. Her attention to detail and emotional clarity demonstrated remarkable strength of character. "This is excellent work," he told her sincerely. "With this level of documentation, combined with the physical evidence and witness testimony, the case against Marcus will be overwhelming." "There's something else," Rachel said, gripping Daniel's hand as another contraction built to its peak. "I want to testify in person when the case goes to trial. I want to look him in the eye and tell a jury exactly what he put me through." The declaration surprised everyone in the room. Most domestic violence survivors preferred to avoid direct confrontation with their abusers, finding the experience re-traumatizing and emotionally devastating. Rachel's willingness to face Marcus in court spoke to a transformation that had been building throughout the night. "Are you sure about that?" Emma asked, concern evident in her voice. "Testifying means reliving everything that happened, with Marcus sitting right there watching you." "He's already taken months of my life," Rachel replied, her voice growing stronger despite the physical stress of labor. "He's made me afraid to live normally, afraid to trust people, afraid to hope for the future. I won't let him take away my voice too." Daniel's radio crackled with updates from the expanding investigation. 3 additional jurisdictions had reported similar cases involving Marcus. Holbrook young women who'd experienced escalating stalking behavior after ending relationships with him, with particular targeting of those who became pregnant after the breakup. "The pattern is becoming clear," Daniel explained to Rachel and Emma. "Marcus specifically seeks out vulnerable women, establishes controlling relationships, then becomes obsessed with any pregnancies that result from those relationships. You weren't randomly selected. You were targeted because of characteristics that appealed to his particular pathology." Dr. Williams returned from consulting with the neonatal team, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Both babies are showing excellent resilience," she reported. "Your daughter is in perfect position for delivery, and while your son remains breech, we're confident we can deliver him safely. The NICU team is prepared for any respiratory support they might need, that their vital signs suggest they may not require extensive intervention. The news brought tears of relief to Rachel's eyes. Throughout the months of hiding her pregnancy, she'd worried constantly about the impact of stress on her baby's development. Knowing they were strong enough to survive their premature birth felt like a victory over Marcus's attempts to control and damage their lives. "I need to call my school," Rachel said, suddenly, the practical realities of her situation beginning to penetrate through the crisis mentality that had sustained her. "I was supposed to teach tomorrow, and I haven't arranged for a substitute." Emma laughed despite the tension in the room. "Rachel, you're about to give birth to twins after being kidnapped by your ex-boyfriend. I think your principal will understand if you need a few sick days." The humor provided a brief respite from the intensity of the situation, reminding everyone present that life would eventually return to normal, a new normal that included two babies and the legal resolution of Marcus's criminal behavior. Daniel's phone rang with a call from the district attorney's office. The conversation was brief but significant, and when he hung up, his expression showed the satisfaction of a police officer who'd seen justice served. "Marcus has been officially charged with multiple felonies," he announced. "The prosecutor is confident we're looking at a minimum of 15 to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of federal charges if we can establish a pattern of interstate criminal activity." Rachel nodded, though her attention was increasingly focused on the physical demands of labor. The contractions were now 2 minutes apart and lasting nearly a minute each, leaving little time for conversation between waves of pain. "It's time," Dr. Williams announced, her voice carrying the authority of a physician who delivered hundreds of babies. "Rachel, your cervix is fully dilated, and baby A is ready to make her entrance into the world." The delivery team mobilized with practiced efficiency, transforming the room into an operating theater equipped for high-risk multiple birth. Rachel found herself at the center of organized chaos, medical personnel checking equipment, monitors, displaying vital signs for 3 patients, and the underlying current of excitement that accompanied any birth. "Emma, I need you to stay with me," Rachel said, reaching for her sister's hand as the final phase of labor began. "Whatever happens, don't leave me alone." "I'm not going anywhere," Emma promised, settling into position beside the delivery bed. "You've been handling this by yourself for months. Now you have all of us." Daniel positioned himself where he could observe the delivery while maintaining his protective oversight of the room's security. In 30 minutes, Rachel Thompson would become a mother. Marcus Holbrook would be facing decades in prison, and 2 babies would begin their lives in a world where they were wanted, protected, and loved. The first tiny footprint appeared on the official birth certificate paper at 7:23 a.m., a perfect impression of impossibly small toes that seemed too delicate to belong to someone who had survived such an ordeal. Baby Rachel's daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to every person in the delivery room. "She's perfect," Dr. Williams announced, holding the baby up for Rachel to see before the neonatal team began their assessment. 5 pounds, 2 ounces, which is excellent for 32 weeks. Strong lungs, good color, and she's breathing on her own. Rachel sobbed with relief and exhaustion as her daughter was placed briefly on her chest, before being moved to the warming bed for evaluation. The baby's cry filled the room, a sound Rachel had dreamed of hearing for months, but had been afraid to hope for during the nightmare of the past 12 hours. "She's so small," Emma whispered, her own tears flowing freely as she watched the medical team work with practiced efficiency around her new niece. "But listen to those lungs. She's definitely letting everyone know she's here." Daniel stepped forward to witness the official documentation of the birth, his role as investigating officer requiring him to ensure proper legal procedures were followed. The first footprint on the birth certificate would serve as evidence in the case against Marcus, proof that Rachel's children existed and deserved protection under the law. "What's her name?" the nurse asked, Preparing the birth certificate paperwork, Rachel looked down at her daughter, red-faced and indignant, tiny fists waving in protest at the bright lights and cold air of the delivery room. After months of referring to the babies only as Twin A and Twin B in her medical records, the moment to choose names had arrived with startling suddenness. Hope, Rachel said without hesitation, the name emerging from somewhere deep in her heart. Her name is Hope Elizabeth Thompson. The choice felt perfect, a name that honored both the future Rachel wanted for her children and the strength that had carried her through the darkest months of her life. Hope Elizabeth would never know a world where her mother lived in fear, where her very existence was a secret that had to be hidden. Dr. Williams continued monitoring Rachel's condition while the neonatal team completed their assessment of baby Hope. Your daughter is showing excellent vital signs, the pediatrician reported. Her respiratory system is functioning well, her heart rate is strong, and her neurological responses are all within normal limits. She needs to stay in the NICU for monitoring, but we're very optimistic about her prognosis. The relief that flooded through Rachel was so intense it triggered another strong contraction, reminding everyone that the delivery process was only half complete. Baby Beba's son was still waiting to make his entrance, and breech presentations always carried additional risks that required careful management. I can see his feet, Dr. Williams announced, her hands working with expert precision to guide the second baby's delivery. Everything looks good so far. His heart rate is strong, and he's tolerating the delivery process well. Daniel's radio crackled with an update from the police station that he'd been waiting for all morning. Martinez, we've got confirmation on 3 additional victims in surrounding counties. The DA's office is filing federal charges under the Violence Against Women Act. This is going to be a landmark case. The news that Marcus would face federal prosecution brought a sense of justice that seemed almost too good to be true. Rachel had spent months believing that no one would believe her story, that Marcus's charm and manipulation would protect him from consequences. Learning that multiple law enforcement agencies were building an unshakable case against him felt like vindication. Did you hear that? Emma asked, squeezing Rachel's hand during a brief respite between contractions. He's going to prison for a very long time. He'll never be able to hurt you or the babies. Rachel nodded, though her attention was divided between the legal victory and the physical demands of delivering her son. The contractions for the second baby were different, more intense, more complicated by his breech position, requiring her to trust completely in Dr. Williams' expertise. I need you to push very gently when I tell you, Dr. Williams instructed, her voice calm but focused. With breech delivery, we want to let gravity and natural contractions do most of the work. Your job is to help guide him out slowly and safely. The next few minutes required every ounce of strength Rachel had left. Delivering Hope had been straightforward, but her son's positioning made every step more challenging. She found herself drawing on reserves of determination she hadn't known she possessed, powered by the knowledge that freedom and safety waited on the other side of this ordeal. I can see his body, Dr. Williams announced with growing excitement. He's almost here, Rachel. One more big push, and you'll be holding your son. The second footprint joined the first on the birth certificate paper at 7:47 a.m., a matching impression that completed the pair Rachel had been protecting for so many months. Baby B emerged into the world more quietly than his sister, but his steady breathing and strong grip on Dr. Williams' finger demonstrated the same determination that had carried his mother through the ordeal. Another beautiful baby, Dr. Williams announced with satisfaction. 4 pounds, 15 ounces, excellent vital signs, and breathing independently. The breech delivery went perfectly. Rachel's son was smaller than his sister, but equally perfect. Shock of dark hair plastered to his tiny head. Dark eyes that seemed to take in his surroundings with serious concentration. Unlike Hope's immediate protests about her new environment, He seemed content to observe quietly while the medical team completed their initial assessment. "He's so calm," Emma marveled, watching her nephew's peaceful expression as he was placed on Rachel's chest for their first skin-to-skin contact. "It's like he's already figured out that he's safe now." Daniel stepped forward with news that transformed the moment from personal triumph to legal victory. "Rachel, I just got word from downtown. Marcus has confessed to everything. The stalking, the kidnapping, the systematic targeting of pregnant women. His lawyer is already discussing a plea agreement that would guarantee a minimum of 25 years in federal prison." The confession felt like the final piece of a puzzle that had been months in the making. Rachel looked down at her son, considering names while processing the knowledge that Marcus would never be able to threaten their family again. The fear that had haunted her for so long was finally definitively over. "James," she said softly, testing the name as she studied her son's face. "James Daniel Thompson." Daniel looked up sharply at the inclusion of his name, surprise and honor evident in his expression. "Rachel, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted gently. "You saved all 3 of our lives tonight. James Daniel will grow up knowing that there are people in the world who protect others, who show up when they're needed most." The pediatrician completed the examination of baby James, her assessment matching the positive results they'd seen. "With hope, both babies are exceeding our expectations for 32-week twins," she reported. "They'll need an ICU monitoring for a few days, but we're looking at much shorter stays than we typically see with premature multiples." Dr. Williams finished the delivery procedures and began the careful work of helping Rachel through the recovery process. "You've been through an extraordinary ordeal," she told her patient. "Your body has handled pregnancy, early labor, and twin delivery under the most stressful circumstances imaginable. You should be incredibly proud of your strength." The strength Dr. Williams mentioned felt surreal to Rachel as she held both babies. For the first time, hope in her right arm, James cradled in her left, both of them perfect and alive and safe. After months of living in fear, of making every decision based on hiding and protection, she could finally focus on the simple joy of being their mother. "They're going to have the most incredible life," Emma whispered, leaning over to kiss each baby's forehead. "They'll never know what it feels like to be afraid, to be controlled, to have their safety threatened." Daniel's radio provided one final update that sealed Marcus's fate permanently. "All charges filed successfully," the dispatcher reported. "Federal prosecution moving forward. Suspect will remain in custody pending trial with no possibility of bail." The medical team began the careful process of preparing Hope and James for their transfer to the NICU, where they would receive specialized care designed for premature infants. Rachel watched every step of the process with the protective intensity of a mother who had already fought too hard to keep her children safe. "Can I visit them whenever I want?" she asked the pediatrician, her arms feeling empty as the warming beds were wheeled toward the door. 24 hours a day, the doctor assured her. "And as soon as you're recovered from delivery, we'll set up a room where you can stay close to them. These babies need their mother nearby." As the delivery room began to empty of medical equipment and personnel, Rachel found herself alone with Emma and Daniel for the first time since the ordeal had begun. The quiet felt almost foreign after hours of crisis management and medical intervention. "It's really over, isn't it?" Rachel asked, though she could barely believe the words as she spoke them. "It's really over," Daniel confirmed. "Marcus Holbrook will spend the next quarter-century in federal prison. You and your children are safe." Emma settled into the chair beside Rachel's bed, her presence a reminder that the isolation Marcus had forced on Rachel was also ending. "What happens now?" she asked. "What do you want your life to look like?" For the first time in months, Rachel allowed herself to think beyond immediate survival. She pictured teaching again, this time with the confidence of someone who had survived the unthinkable. She imagined watching Hope and James take their first steps, say their first words, start school, all the normal milestones that had seemed impossible during her months of hiding. "I want to teach them to be brave," Rachel said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I want them to know that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's terrifying. And I want to help other women who find themselves where I was." The transformation in Rachel's voice was unmistakable, from victim to survivor to advocate, all in the space of 12 hours that had changed everything. Daniel recognized the shift, having seen it in other survivors who discovered strength they hadn't known they possessed. "You're going to make an incredible mother," he told her sincerely. "And those babies are going to grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally." As dawn gave way to full morning outside the hospital windows, Rachel Thompson closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in months: hope for the future. Hope Elizabeth and James Daniel were safe. Marcus was in custody, and for the first time since she discovered her pregnancy, she could imagine a life defined by joy rather than fear. 3 weeks later, Rachel sat in her living room rocker with Hope Elizabeth sleeping peacefully against her shoulder, while James Daniel dozed in his bouncy seat nearby. The framed photograph on the side table captured this exact moment, a professional hospital portrait showing Rachel exhausted but radiant, holding her healthy twins with a smile that spoke of triumph over unimaginable adversity. The twins had exceeded every medical expectation, requiring only 5 days in the NICU before coming home to the apartment that had once felt like a prison, but now buzzed with the joyful chaos of new parenthood. Hope had proven to be the more demanding of the two, expressing her opinions loudly and frequently, while James maintained the calm observation that had characterized his first moments of life. Emma had kept her promise to stay, taking a leave of absence from her job in Portland to help during the baby's first weeks home. The sisters had grown closer through the shared experience of late-night feedings and diaper changes, their relationship strengthened by the knowledge that they'd survived crisis together. "The district attorney called this morning," Emma said, settling onto the couch with a cup of coffee and the morning newspaper. "Marcus's sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month. 28 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for 15 years. Rachel nodded, adjusting Hope's position as her daughter stirred against her shoulder. The legal victory felt abstract compared to the immediate reality of caring for 2 premature infants, but she understood its importance for future victims who might never have to experience what she'd endured. "I've been thinking about the victim impact statement," Rachel said, her voice thoughtful. "I want to talk about more than just what Marcus took from me. I want to focus on what he couldn't take, my determination to protect these babies, my refusal to let fear define my choices." The transformation in Rachel's perspective amazed everyone who knew her story. Where another person might have focused on trauma and loss, she consistently chose to emphasize strength and recovery. Her testimony during Marcus's plea hearing had moved seasoned prosecutors to tears while demonstrating the power of survivor advocacy. Daniel Martinez had become a regular visitor during the twins' first weeks home, his protective instincts extending naturally into friendship with the family he'd helped save. His own children, now college-aged, had embraced their honorary aunt and cousins with enthusiasm, providing Rachel with a support network that extended far beyond professional duty. "Any word on the federal case expansion?" Daniel asked during his weekly check-in visit, settling into the armchair where he'd spent hours helping with nighttime feedings when Emma needed sleep. 7 victims total across 4 states, Rachel replied, her voice carrying satisfaction at the scope of justice being served. "Jennifer Walsh has been incredible. She's coordinated with all the other survivors to ensure Marcus faces charges for every crime he committed." The federal investigation had revealed a pattern of predatory behavior spanning nearly 5 years, with Marcus systematically targeting vulnerable women and escalating his control tactics whenever pregnancy was involved. Rachel's case had been the catalyst for a comprehensive prosecution that would ensure he never had the opportunity to harm another family. The FBI profiler thinks there might be more victims who haven't come forward yet, Daniel added. Your willingness to go public with your story has encouraged other women to speak up. The ripple effect of your courage is still expanding. Hope stirred and began to fuss, her internal clock signaling that feeding time was approaching. Rachel stood to prepare a bottle while Emma reached for James, who was showing similar signs of hunger. The routine had become second nature, a choreographed dance of new parenthood that filled the apartment with purpose and joy. I've been accepted to the Domestic Violence Advocacy Training Program, Rachel announced while warming Hope's bottle. 6 months of coursework, then I can start working with survivors while still maintaining my teaching schedule. The decision to become an advocate had evolved naturally from Rachel's experience with the legal system. She'd discovered a talent for translating complex legal procedures into understandable terms, helping other victims navigate the same bureaucratic challenges she'd faced. Mom would be so proud, Emma said softly, thinking of their mother who'd passed away 2 years earlier. She always said you had a gift for helping people find their strength. Rachel settled back into the rocker with Hope, who latched onto her bottle with the determined hunger that characterized all her activities. Across the room, James accepted his feeding with the same calm efficiency he brought to aspect of his young wife. 2 distinct personalities already emerging despite their shared beginning. The apartment looked different now than it had during the months of hiding. Photographs covered every surface. Emma's family pictures, Daniel's children at various ages, the hospital portrait of Rachel with the twins, and new snapshots documenting Hope and James's first weeks of life. The space that had once felt isolated now buzzed with connection and community. I have something for you, Daniel said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small leather journal, its cover embossed with the words, Hope and James, the beginning. I thought you might want to document their childhood the way you documented your pregnancy, he explained. But this time, you're writing about joy instead of fear. Rachel accepted the journal with tears in her eyes, thinking of the worn notebook. That had been her lifeline during the darkest months. That journal now sat in an evidence locker, its pages serving as testimony to one woman's refusal to surrender to intimidation and control. The first entry will be about today, she decided, looking around the room at the people who'd become her chosen family. About how sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most difficult circumstances. As afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the peaceful scene of new life and renewed hope, Rachel Thompson understood that her story wasn't defined by the months of fear that had preceded this moment. Instead, it was characterized by the strength she'd discovered, the love she protected, and the future she'd fought to secure for 2 children who would grow up knowing they were cherished beyond measure. The photograph on the side table captured more than a moment in time. It documented the triumph of maternal love over every force that had tried to destroy it.